I talked about the reform of the United Nations, and obviously I said that there is a need to reform the United Nations. There is general consensus that something has to be done to make the universal organization more effective, more able to deal with threats, the new challenges of the 21st century. But I have to say the debate has been quite stimulating, and of course maybe I can make some comments also on what was said before, because at the end of the day, when we talk about the United Nations, we talk about the organization that brings together all the member states, all the countries in the world. So basically that's the place where we're supposed to discuss and come to agreements, come to shared definitions, shared values. This has been the case in many ways, in many times over the history of the United Nations. Let's think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which every country in the world subscribes to, which was adopted in 1948, and subsequently other instruments for the protection and promotion of human rights were adopted. What I'm trying to say, and I agree with Professor Bindi said before, that there is indeed there are some standards that every country in the world has accepted. So we have to be very careful here when we say, different types of democracies and different types of human rights, and there are some principles that everybody agrees on, and one is that there are some basic human rights that every country has to respect. The other one is that the promotion and protection of human rights, democracy, development, and peace and security are all interconnected, interdependent, interrelated. For decades, the Western countries used to say civil and political rights are more important, and the developing world would say no, economic rights are more important. The right to food is more important than the right to, free speech. What do we do with free speech if we don't have enough to eat? But that was a tricky argument on both sides. So after decades of discussing, then we came to this conclusion in 1993 at the Conference on Human Rights, that there are no rights that are superior to other rights. All human rights are important. Of course, you have to have economic rights. You have to respect economic rights. You have to give people a job, an opportunity to have a job, decent life, decent standard of living, but at the same time you have to give those same people the right to express themselves, because expressing themselves means exactly being able to fulfill one's potential in every aspect, not just economic. I think when we talk about China, for instance, there's a lot of stress on, Professor Zhang is busy talking with, but no, there's a lot of stress on economic rights, and how China has managed to ensure this impressive economic growth over the past few decades. But then we have come to an agreement, and everybody has accepted this, that all human rights are important. And of course, at the same time, we have accepted the principle that human rights and democracy should respect individual realities, local realities, which doesn't mean to sort of twist the principle. It means to sort of adapt them to local realities. It's a different thing. And it's a thin line, but it's very clear. So there is a common language that we all share. Still, there are differences, of course, and that's a good thing also, that we have different ways of looking at things. If I may, I would like to comment briefly on what Professor Zhang said before about Gorbachev's policy that sort of disintegrated the Soviet Union. I think there is a different way of looking at that. Maybe Gorbachev's policies, although unintentionally, liberated some 25 nations, allowed the reunification of Germany, allowed Europe to be integrated for the first time. Now we have 27 countries all together in one single entity. So I think that we shouldn't be too scared of change. Sometimes what is seen as, fragmentation, disintegration, disorder, in fact, is liberation, liberating new energies, new potential, and, given the possibility to express ourselves better. But the United Nations have a framework to deal with many global issues, all the global issues. Think of the environment. We have a legal framework. The problem is that not every country subscribes to that legal framework, and that's the Kyoto Protocol and a number of international conventions on the environment, climate change. We have terrorism, which is considered to be a serious threat to the international peace and security. The United Nations developed a strategy to fight terrorism. We still have differences there because certain countries want to make a difference between, so-called, pure terrorists and so-called freedom fighters, namely freedom fighters, those that, commit acts of terrorism to sort of liberate an occupied territory. Whereas most countries think that, all acts of terrorism should be condemned and are wrong. But we do have a UN strategy to fight terrorism. We have international conventions on many issues. Still, one cannot deny that there are divisions. There are divisions. There are divisions on how to deal with very important problems. For instance, impunity, mass violations of human rights. You know that a few years ago, the principle of the responsibility to protect populations, civilians, from mass murder, genocide, ethnic cleansing. The responsibility to protect, this principle was adopted by the United Nations World Summit in 2005. So everybody agreed that the international community should do something to stop these acts. Even in recent history, we've had terrible instances of mass murder and genocide. And in the 90s, we had the former Yugoslavia and we had Rwanda. Now, since 2003, we have Darfur, which is a serious case, and the international community hasn't been able to deal effectively with that yet. Because when it comes to making concrete decisions, in fact, there are differences. I'm not going to say that we have the West against the rest of the world, all the developing world, all the non-aligned movement, which is a very important grouping in the United Nations, because one could say that the West does not exist as such, because on many issues the European Union has different positions to those of the United States. So when we talk about the West, we should always sort of try and remember it's not a monolith, as the developing world is not a monolith. Well, if I have to conclude, basically, there are a number of issues, a number of principles which we all agree on, which we all share. There are still divisions. The best thing is, of course, to keep on talking, to keep on discussing, and of course, the United Nations is exactly the forum that provides that opportunity. Thank you very much.